All right, well, let's get to it. And I promised that we'd be speaking again with Dr. Michael Santamaria. He's a neuropsychologist, actually called the show the other day, and on the heels of a brief update we just shared with you there about what's going on at Christian Central Academy. There's an awful lot of people looking forward to learning everything they possibly can about how COVID is affecting children. And Michael, welcome to NBL. When you called the show the other day, all of a sudden I realized that you were pretty well informed on this issue, and apparently as a Ph.D. neuropsychologist, you spent a lot of time researching this, talking about this issue. Welcome to NBL. How did you even come to call the program the other day? Were you just listening, or somebody tip you off or something?
Thank you for having me, Neil. It just so happens that I had finished an affidavit regarding the matter of masks and children in school, working with the law firm Hogan Willig, and my wife contacted me and let me know about your show and that the discussion was going on. So I called and you put me on. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and it was a real honor to have the opportunity to talk to you, particularly on the heels of your work with that, affidavit. Obviously, Hogan Willig has been working on, what is it, a class action lawsuit or something related to this issue. It's on the hearts and minds of a lot of people. There's no doubt, and I guess that's why you got involved.
Yes, and I believe Cambria is working on it as well with Christian Central Academy.
Yeah. So, what can you tell us about this? By the way, help us understand the bigger picture of your own background and why you'd be writing detailed stuff about the impact of COVID on children.
Neil, I'm board certified as a neuropsychologist. I hold a Ph.D. and I've completed a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical neuropsychology. I do work for a number of physicians and other doctors and professionals in the area, and attorneys and private individuals may consult me about the effects of brain injury, neurologic conditions, or psychiatric conditions on intelligence, academic achievement, memory. And so I do evaluations of that nature. That's sort of the crux of what I do. I also serve as a consultant for a number of organizations, including the National Football League baseline assessment program, evaluating players who are retired and may have had head injuries over the course of their careers. Also serve as a consultant for the Federal Aviation Administration, evaluating pilots who may have concerns regarding cognitive functioning that may impact flying. And I have contracts with other organizations in New York State and locally. I do evaluations for people who are candidates for Buffalo Police and Fire jobs, and also do evaluations for the New York State Commission for the Blind and the New York State Unified Court System, as well as Niagara County Department of Social Services. And in my practice, since, let's say, about March 2020, there have been, I guess, a lot of changes. I see a lot more children who are more distressed, more stress, depression, anxiety, limitations in social contact, being not permitted to go to school, at least at times, not permitted to engage in informal or formal activities, get-togethers, structured activities, athletics, music, clubs, whatnot. And there's been a big jump in what I'm hearing as far as, again, stress, anxiety, and depression. Mm-hmm. And I also have found that, often in my practice, if I have a patient, child, or adult who needs some sort of support, counseling may be an option, as well as other mental health services, such as medication in some cases. And I've just found it's been much more difficult nowadays when I try to refer a patient for counseling or other psychiatric treatment. It's much more difficult to get people in. The wait lists seem to be considerably longer nowadays, coinciding with pandemic circumstances and particularly the fact that people are missing out on large segments of the lives they used to live.
Yeah, on the one hand, I completely agree with you, but on the other hand, I don't know if anybody made it to the Erie County Fair this year or saw the Bills game on Sunday, either in person or on television, but it looks like some people are living their lives quite freely, and yet a whole bunch is being made about kids going to school. And, I'm not an expert, you are, but seems to me that there's been an awful lot said about how small the impact has generally been on kids related to COVID, and yet people are going crazy. They seem to be going overboard with regard to we got to protect the children. Now, I'm not advocating for not protecting kids, not by any means, but what are your thoughts about that? We live There's a lot of activity here in Buffalo related to public events, and yet we're freaking out about kids going back to school.
I agree, Neil. People will tend to gravitate to safety as a reason. Safety is maybe the number one excuse given to separate you from your money or your freedoms. Safety, of course, is very important, but in a lot of situations, it may be overstated. You mentioned the Erie County Fair and also the Bills game recently, and so I think a lot of parents saw what was happening with the county fair and or the Bills game, and they saw what's happening with their children in small settings, and they said, this doesn't seem right that my child should have to wear a mask in this setting. It's a small setting. I don't like it. And I think that there probably are many other parents who are very happy that schools are open and that their child is wearing a mask, and they would like others to wear a mask. I think if we look at things, if we look at the Danish study, which is the largest study on masks, it's really not coming up with conclusive evidence that there's a lot of impact from masks as far as reducing disease transmission, at least with regard to COVID. I would agree that in certain situations you may have some benefit from a mask, and certainly surgeons and others in certain situations will wear a mask. So I'm certainly not saying that there could not be a value. As Americans, we tend to like to make our own decisions. We like good advice, maybe more so than being told what to do. If we think about what's happened politically, and not necessarily in favor of either Republicans or Democrats, but I think we have. I can be critical, I think, of actions taken by both parties without necessarily having a side. I think early on in the pandemic circumstance, there were people who were frustrated when then President Trump was just saying, don't worry about it, and not giving information. And I think what happened is Governor Cuomo of New York kind of came in, and he had a lot of facts and information. He had advice. People could learn from it and could make their own decisions, and I think that was appealing. And then I think over time that became unappealing as Mr. Cuomo sort of segued from informing people into mandates and telling people what to do with emergency powers and dictating a problem. And I think maybe some of the same people who may have had concerns in the past maybe people who voted for Joe Biden maybe are not really very fond of the president now saying, all right, we want everybody to get vaccinated. People like to have information. They like government to guide them. They like to be able to rely on government for science and good information, but not necessarily be told what to do. You mentioned this sort of disparity or maybe hypocrisy relating to...
Yeah, I think hypocrisy is a better word, but go ahead, sure.
So, I mean, we did some calculations, and this is one of the things that appeared in the affidavit that I finalized on Monday. We're talking about the Bills Stadium. We've got 71,000 people there. And someone might be quick to say, well, it's outdoors and the school's not. Well, yes, in a general sense, but the Jim Kelly Club section is 1,000 people, and that's a large indoor area, and people are packed tightly in there, and same thing with the M&T Club. And we have several restaurants that are satellite to the stadium in which people are tightly packed, and so we're getting large numbers, much more so than in a classroom, who are packed tightly together, who are not necessarily wearing masks. And so parents see that, they see the disparity, and they don't like it. Same thing with the Erie County Fair. On a typical year, the gate admissions would be around 1 million. So this year, the official count for gate admissions, so this is the number of entries to the fair, and it may be the same person repeated days, but over the 12 days of the fair, for this year, the Erie County Fair attendance was 981,264. And people, again, might say, well, the fair's outdoors. And yes, large parts of the fair are, but there also are sections that are indoors, including some of the agricultural areas and some of the musical venues. And so, again, parents see that, and they see that this is something that the county is behind, and then they see and potentially profiting from, and going so far to have the Erie County Health Department advertise the fair on its Twitter account, and then the kids need to be masked to go to school and remain 3 to 6 feet apart. So this is where the public is not necessarily seeing things being presented in a fair manner, particularly with regard to kids in school.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, and I hope this comes out right. and that you understand my question, because it's clear in my mind anyway. But we talked a little bit about the impact of okay, so there's the safety concern, right? We want to keep kids safe. We don't want them to get COVID is one issue. I get that. Totally understand why people would be concerned about that. But on the other hand, we talked about the impact that masking and social distancing is having on learning and on socialization, on language development, particularly amongst younger kids, increase in stuff like anxiety and depression. I think I mentioned on the show the other day, I've got a first responder lives across the street from me, said you can't believe the number of suicide calls we've had in just the last few months among young people under the age of 23. And a lot of this being attributed to COVID, that there's depression, there's anxiety, there's mental health issues that come into play. What about that safety? And so I don't know if you can comment in some general or specific way about safety from that perspective, because that stuff matters too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And we have to think about balanced risk. If we are looking for ideal or perfection, it may be very difficult to at least immediately get to zero as far as COVID cases. Now, we've had past epidemics, and they eventually fade. But you make a very good point. There are other things that we need to be concerned about. There are other things that are taking people's lives. For example, in younger people, we have risks associated with motor vehicle deaths, associated with smoking-related deaths, particularly as someone segues into from middle to later adulthood. And a rising concern in recent decades has been suicide among younger individuals. So when we make massive, large-scale changes to someone's freedom and lifestyle, we can have a rise in some other sort of risk factors, and that could be stress, anxiety, depression, or that could be, for some individuals, suicide.
Well, go ahead. It's absolutely shocking what you're talking about, because you talked about balancing risk factors, and I don't hear much of that conversation from school boards, elected officials, non-elected officials like health commissioners and other people. That conversation isn't happening. It's just sort of this, oh my gosh, what about the children? Okay, let's look at that, right, from the big picture. Is anybody really listening to the big picture, Michael, in your estimation?
I think some people are, but it would help if in my opinion, if the general public had access to a little bit more information to maybe make their own decisions regarding how risky the situation is. I think I threw a few numbers at you the other day, Neil, just about life and death. If you take the general U.S. population of about 330 million or so, in life expectancy that might be considered to be around 78 or 79 years, before any sort of pandemic circumstance, about 7,900 Americans are going to die every day. And that's just the normal life and death cycle. So if you apportion that to Erie County, in a typical day before the pandemic, you might expect about 22 deaths per day. So now we're sort of at a point where, based on recent past statistics for a recent past week, there were considered to be 13 COVID-related deaths in Erie County over the course of the week, or about 1.85 COVID-related deaths per day. And it might be a matter of debate whether or not to what extent these were COVID cases versus variability in how those are tabulated. But let's just take it at face value and say, all right, we've got 1.85 deaths a day attributed to COVID. Well, that's about half as many as could be attributed to smoking-related deaths in Erie County over the same time period. Typically on any given day, about 3.6, 3.8 deaths per day in Erie County can be attributed to smoking. So why so much emphasis on COVID, and why not an emphasis on something that's taking twice as many lives? Smoking, there's still choices related to that. People want to have choices related to their health, their bodies, and how they handle COVID for themselves and their family.
What's the end game? What's Hogan Willig working towards? What exactly? How could the affidavit help, and what are they hoping for in terms of outcome?
I think that there are short-term and longer-term goals. I think a big picture would sort of be a return to something that approximates life as we knew it as of the beginning of 2020. In a shorter term, I think steps in that direction would be more local control, more general advice and generally informative information from government, but the opportunity for local governments and local school districts to make decisions. And that allows for a lot of trial and error in different places, and you can see how things work or don't work in a certain place. And we can learn from that, whereas we might have more trouble learning from a more homogenized approach where everything is dictated to be in a certain fashion and people don't necessarily agree. I think that if a child wants to go to school and wear a mask, if the parent wants a child to wear a mask, that may be that should be allowed. There are a lot of people who really don't want to do that. Can we mix people who do and do not have masks? I think that's reasonable at this point. I'm not really concerned about that. But certainly there should be some room for some, let's say, islands, places who would not like to require masks, such as Christian Central Academy. And, if we have places where that's happening, if we truly do see an adverse impact on health, then that gives us basically a mini set of data that we could go on and make adjustments moving forward. But the fact is that people are not necessarily seeing the major adverse impact when we have these large-scale events. We've had the fair, we've had the Bills game. We've been told in the past when there are large-scale get-togethers, like, for example, a motorcycle rally in Sturgis, South Dakota, that there's going to be a big spread thereafter, and whether or not that actually happens and whether it's actually going to happen from the Erie County Fair or the recent past Bills game, as far as a spike in COVID cases, it remains to be determined, but I'm not seeing evidence of it.
Yeah, and by the way, to clarify, Christian Central Academy isn't anti-vaccine or anti-mask. They're pro-freedom, meaning let parents decide. So the point is, there will be some kids at Christian, provided their lawsuit prevails, there will be some kids whose parents want there will be some parents who want their kids to wear masks at CCA, and they'll have the right to do so. And some parents that would say, we don't want you wearing a mask at school, and those kids won't be wearing a mask. If you're talking about, I think you used the word islands, if I heard you correctly, if there's a place where people want to gather without masks, this is the United States of America. Whatever happened, by the way, you got the feminists that for many years on the abortion issue were saying, my body, my choice. Where does that kind of thinking play into this? Because you're not hearing that anymore. And by the way, Joe Biden, just one article I saw recently, on the heels of mask mandates, is now at his lowest approval rating since his, term as president of the United States. My point being that I think that a vast majority of American people don't want to be told what they have to do with their own bodies. And I sense that you're coming from that perspective as well in terms of the COVID issue, that we ought to be able to look at the science and make a reasonable decision for ourselves whether or not we want to wear masks or get a vaccine.
I agree, and it's not one president or the other. I think Donald Trump could have helped himself by presenting a little bit more data or information. That's how
right.
Andrew Cuomo was able to gain ground, providing data and information. And same thing with Joe Biden. If he were more apt to provide data and information rather than try to ram it down people's throats or into people's arms, as the case may be, he might be more popular as well.
Well, and one nuance that I picked up on that I don't ever hear anyone talking about is the idea that Donald Trump is the one who pushed for an early vaccine. Let's get this thing done. Let's, Operation Warp Speed. Let's make sure that we get a vaccine by the end of the year. And everybody he was mocked for that. When the first vaccine became available, he took it. His vice president, Mike Pence, took it because they chose to do so. And yet today, the largest number of people who are saying, I don't want to have to take this vaccine. I'm afraid of it. We're not sure, how exactly this is going to affect us 20 years from now. There's no longitudinal studies because it's so recent. So they're largely, not totally for sure, but a high percentage of those people are ones who voted for Donald Trump. So there's kind of that's sort of an interesting dynamic that I don't know if anybody can explain, but ultimately pro-freedom people love freedom in every area of their lives.
And a lot of the other folks, another segment of people who are resistant to getting a vaccination are healthcare workers. If we've got people who've been fighting this on the front lines for months, why is it that there's some hesitation? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that one shouldn't do, but I think people in the healthcare field are well aware that in the past we've rushed into things medically, whether it's vaccines or other medications or other procedures, and we've seen problematic effects down the line. Like an example would be the drug thalidomide, which was first marketed over the counter in Germany, actually West Germany, in 1957. And it was widely used in Europe. It was never approved by the FDA, the U.S. having been cautious at that time, but it's been attributed to adverse impact on probably 10,000 pregnancies, about 40% of which are believed to have died. And those who survived, having had prenatal exposure to thalidomide, had a variety of problems with arms and legs, sometimes missing, problems with eye formation, and with heart issues. And so, obviously, thalidomide is very different from a vaccine that we have now, but the fact remains that this is something that was available for 4 years and went on before this was actually put together that these problems were occurring. And if you consider that the typical vaccine that we've had around, measles, mumps, rubella, other sorts of vaccines that may have been developed for various tropical diseases, whatnot, typical vaccine takes about 10 or 15 years to develop. Kudos to former President Donald Trump for being able to get this fast track for vaccines right now, but I think there are a lot of people who are informed and have concern about, okay, we got this approval. It happened very quickly. Some of these things may have been rushed. Some corners may have been cut. What do we really know about the long-term effects? And it probably doesn't help matters that, like, if you think about what happened in the end of 2020 with the new Alzheimer's drug, Aduhelm, this was approved by the FDA, but this is despite a large, a study of outside experts having found the strong evidence questioning the efficacy of the drugs and a number of what they consider to be red flags or concerns as far as how the numbers were put together in support of this medication. So right there, we're sort of raising some questions regarding how scientific versus how political are some of the decisions that are coming out of the FDA lately.
It's also very troubling, and I think that people want to be proactive. They want to do something. I've gotten requests from people, to assist them with religious exemption, letters and that kind of thing. I can't do everything to fix the world for people, but what do you recommend that people do with this information? I mean, you're a board-certified neuropsychologist. You've done work in epidemiology. You're looking at this from a professional perspective, and you say there's a lot of reason for concern here with regard to our freedoms because people are being forced to do things that they really shouldn't have to do based on what we know of the science. And we see hypocrisy in the way this is playing out, in public life. And I think people are frustrated. Do you have any suggestions about what people should do to respond?
I think it's fairly general. I mean, basically, the better the general public is as far as understanding of facts, numbers, information that seems to be straightforward, and the better the average individual can rely on factual information like that in order to make requests or to decline things that are attempted to be being pushed, the better that the public in general can make a statement that we're not going to go along with this. If we have folks who are making decisions politically or otherwise, getting feedback from more and more constituents, voters, people, that they don't like what's going on, things will change. And what we saw sort of early on in the pandemic is a lot of us were very concerned and very cautious, and we're listening to what was being told. And then when things started not adding up, then a lot of questions started to arise. But basically, I think at this point in time, we want to be informed. We want to, the more the public can be informed and question what's happening, and let people making decisions, whether it's at a school, whether it's with their employer, whether it's with state, local, federal government, just basically asking questions and politely in a civil manner, or maybe for some people otherwise, saying this isn't right. That's how things are going to change.
So well said, and I appreciate your input here. And I'd like to say that, there's an open door. If you want to come back at any point, update us on information, that'd be great. Is there any way that people can connect with your work, anything that you've published, any kind of site or anything like that at this point?
Well, what do you think, Neil? If I send you a couple things, would you want to put them up on your website?
Yeah, we'll put a link. If you want to send us a few articles or anything you've got, we'll put it up on our WDCX site and say this is work from Dr. Michael Santamaria, who was on the program today. So we'll put it up on the Facebook page. Yeah.
Very good. So I sent you the one affidavit the other day, and why don't we put a couple other things together, and you select one or more things that you think might be helpful.
Okay. Send it along. We'll get right on that. Michael, thank you for being with us. God bless you, and let's stay in touch. Appreciate your work.
God bless, Neil. Thank you so much for having me on. Take care.
Bye-bye. Dr. Michael Santamaria, our guest here on NBL. We'll be back with more right after this from Attrell Toyota.